Hello, faithful listeners. My name's Clay Thompson, and I'll be your guide once again in the fiction room. Today's prompt is brought to us from username BigWillieB123. Reincarnation is a known, common, and expected result of death. You are a bounty hunter that specializes in tracking down people who have committed suicide to escape debts or a jail sentence. As always, I hope you enjoy hearing these stories as much as I enjoy reading them, but without further ado, let's begin with our first story, written by Inkfinger. The people in the slum disappeared into their makeshift homes as bounty hunter Dean Hollow strode through the narrow streets, squinting at the device strapped to his wrist. It had been pinging quietly when he entered the village. Now it gave a piercing whistle. He turned to the house in front of him. Well, house was charitable. It was little more than a hovel. The woman's eyes darkened as she saw him enter, and she shook her head fiercely when she glimpsed the insignia on his shoulder that proclaimed his status as a bounty hunter. "My boy, good," she said, shielding the kid from his view and snatching up a rusty knife that lay on the table. "Good! This is wrong house."
"I don't think so, ma'am," Dean said. "The detector does not lie. Your son, well, his previous incarnation, died before their invention. Nifty little things. He tells me when I'm close to the spirit I'm hunting. A case of poor timing for your son, dying before he knew they'd come along. He might have waited to off himself after killing all those people, huh?"
She took a swipe at him, which he dodged easily, before disarming her. The boy ducked out behind her, clutching something tightly in his arms. Probably a weapon, the little rat.
"Not so fast, Elijah. Or is it Samar now? So many lives, so many deaths behind you,"
Dean sneered, twisting the boy's arm and deriving a deep pleasure in the cry that escaped Samar's lips. The kid dropped whatever he had been holding, but Dean was too fixated on Samar's terrified face to care. He'd been looking for this psychopath for 6 lifetimes, been demoted in the process of his repeated escapes. The last one had been the worst. A successful suicide after butchering 5 families.
"Stop struggling or I'll hurt you,"
he barked, dragging the boy away, without another glance at the mother, who was screaming at him, slipping into her native Hindi in her fury.
"We've got a long way to travel, and I don't care if you get there unconscious or not. I promise you, the government doesn't care either."
Not me, please,"
the boy said desperately. Dean rolled his eyes. The smartest criminal he'd ever dealt with, resorting to whining and begging for mercy. He was almost disappointed. In the hovel, Samar's mother was still keening, rocking in the corner of the house. Her boy's rat scampered closer to her to sniff at her, and she resisted the urge to kick at it. She had always hated the dirty, ragged creature, but Samar had loved and cared for it. He had been cradling it, even as the hunter came. She would not chase away what her boy had cherished. The rat skittered to the door of the house and looked out, whiskers quivering. He could still see the bounty hunter in the distance, pulling the boy and cuffing him over the head. Something turned over in its heart. He had escaped again, and could go anywhere he wanted now. But Samar had loved him, had fed him scraps he could not afford to not eat. The first time anything had cared for him in 6 lifetimes, devotion he scarcely deserved. He almost missed it. The feeling of Samar's fingers running over his fur, the sound of laughter when he ate from the boy's hand. The rat whipped its tail and set out, keeping an eye on the bounty hunter and darting down the road. He might be smaller in this life, but his teeth were sharp, and necks were easy to shred. Some skills were never forgotten. The rat bared its teeth in a grin. It had been too long since his last meal.
"Oh, this was good."
It's such a moral dilemma because I don't know who to root for, the killer or the bounty hunter. It's so confusing because they're both kind of bad people. Bad versus evil. Pretty good. I would love to see more of this, and props to Inkfinger for this story. And now let's move on to our second story, written by Seameister 2. Thunder rumbled as the gray clouds lumbered across the sky. Under the relative safety of the green canopy of the forest, Jameson strode confidently through the trees, only stopping occasionally to recast the tracking spell. As the orb pulsed more fervently, Jameson became more cautious, choosing instead to move from trunk to trunk. The trees gave way to a dirt clearing, in which a small tent had been erected next to a smoldering attempt at a campfire. Jameson almost felt sorry. His current target's link had only been triggered a few days before. Suddenly having the knowledge that in your previous life you had been a monster dumped into your brain affected teenagers in different ways. Some gave themselves up, some killed themselves to break the chain, and some ran. The caution in his approach was justified. Having access to a previous life's memories meant that some of his targets had powerful dark magic at their disposal, wrapped in a scared, emotional shell. It was not a good combination. But this target was probably safe. Sauk's family had confirmed that he barely showed any aptitude for sorcery in the 15 years of his short life. The influx of Devert's memories had triggered the fight or flight response. Sauk had to run to a place that he thought he could be safe while he processed everything. This would not be the setting for an epic battle. Probably. Jameson stopped, closed his eyes, and extended his sense. The trees began to ring out in their customary low hum. The tent added a smooth tone. No jarring notes that would indicate a curse. No pulses of silence to indicate null zones. Jameson reopened his eyes and focused on the tent. "Keon Salk!" he exclaimed loudly. Slowly, a disheveled teenager emerged from the tent. "Yes," Sauk said, wearily. "You know why I'm here," said Jameson. He stood, one arm raised in a defense pose, and silently prepared his combat magic. Sauk sighed. "Ugh, I didn't ask for this! This isn't fair!" He looked dejected and hugged his body tight. Jameson sympathized. "Yeah, it's not fair. Devert murdered those people over a decade ago. For you, it's not even a part of your history. For the families, though, it's a bitter memory. That's why a mark was placed on his body after his suicide, and that's why I'm here now. I want to finally bring him to justice." Sauk sighed again. "Yeah, I know. I just thought if I came out here, I could ignore his voice." His voice trembled. "But it won't stop, will it?" Jameson reached into his robe and retrieved his binding chains. "No, I'm afraid not. But I can take you to people who can help." He gingerly started moving closer towards Sauk. Sauk scoffed. "You mean put me in a prison until I die of normal causes? That kind of help?" He shook his head softly in resignation. "I guess I have no choice." He held out his hands in surrender. As Jameson moved in closer, suddenly Sauk's eyes flashed, and his hands began to jerk upwards into the beginnings of a casting pose. This was Jameson's worst fear. Devert was asserting control. However, Jameson's preparation had paid off. As soon as he saw Sauk's eyes flashing, he knelt and slammed his open palm into the ground, channeling his binding spell. Violet vines sprang from the dirt, piercing Sauk's arms and legs, and pulled him down to the ground. Sauk cried out in pain. Jameson moved over to Sauk. "So, Devert, I guess we're doing this the hard way then," he commented dryly, kneeling to bind his hands. Sauk was too shocked to respond. Jameson stood up, then pulled out his communication glass. "I've bound divert's host, requesting transport to Cartacan," he said. The glass hummed. Then a woman's voice spoke out. "Transport request granted. Good job, Hunter. See you shortly." So I really like how this author made a world around the story and then made the story around that world, because that's very good for keeping track of your own world and your own lore without making it too similar to someone else's, like making it first, then making that story. So applause all around. 10 out of 10 would absolutely read again. And now, dear listeners, we must unfortunately bid you farewell once again. Thank you all so much for tuning in to The Fiction Room. If you enjoyed today's stories, please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. It would very much help us. And wherever you are in the world, be safe, be well, and we'll see all of you next time.